an original MCM production.
And now, George Salveson of counsel at Andrus Intellectual Property Law will introduce our program. George?
Thank you, President Dan. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Michael Telzrow. He has been director of the Wisconsin Veterans Museum since 2010. It's located at 30 West Mifflin Street in Madison. And this is an educational activity from the Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs. They just recently opened a new exhibit, called New World War I exhibit. It was opened this month, and they are continually updating their exhibits and things. Now, what's neat and unique about this particular facility is that it's dedicated to the citizen soldiers of our state, Wisconsin. It's much more than a building located on the square of Madison. The idea here is to give you a feel what it's like to serve in the military, what our citizens, our ancestors have felt and thought when they were actually in the military itself. And this is a very important thing. The greatest thing that we can do is to thank our men and women who have served this state and our country. Well, Mike has graduated of University of Central Florida. He has a master's degree from University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and he majored in public history and museum studies. He started his museum career in 1995 with the Wisconsin Veterans Museum as a curator assistant. He's also worked at the Neville Public Museum of Brown County, which is downtown Green Bay along the Fox River. He's also involved and has worked with the mighty 8th Air Force Museum, which is near Savannah, Georgia. And this has quite a display of Air Force type of planes and bombers and so on and so forth. Quite an eventful place. He's also, in 2006, he was the executive director of the National Railroad Museum here in Green Bay. He's developed over 20 museum pieces of a wide variety, from military history to modern bedrooms. So he's had quite a variety of careers. He's written a number of articles on the history and culture of the military. And in 2008, he was named the Everyday Hero by the Green Bay Press Gazette. And he was honored by the Green Bay Area Chamber of Commerce as a very significant impact to his profession. He's served 8 years in the Coast Guard, and rumor has it that he is a banjo player extraordinaire. And that is no small feat, because that is really one of America's true native art forms. It is my pleasure today to introduce Michael Telzrow. Michael.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and I hope the banjo playing thing doesn't influence you negatively. It is truly an honor to speak here today, not only because it's Armed Forces Week, but because we're here at Milwaukee County Veterans Memorial, a site that makes us remember, and a site, of course, designed by one of the 20th century's greatest architects that is appropriate for that. So why have a Veterans Museum? I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Veterans Museum first, but why do we need a Veterans Museum? Well, I think we all know the answer to that, but we have a civic duty to remember and to acknowledge the sacrifice of our service members. It makes us a better country, because a country is more than just lines drawn on a map, right? It's a shared culture, it's a shared memory, shared values. And the men and women in the military embody all of those values that we hold so dear, that we cherish in this country. So learning about the veterans' experience allows us to connect fundamental events, economic, political, and intellectual trends, and cultural influences to that larger picture of American history. It goes beyond a mere discussion of battlefields and strategy, but reveals human inclinations and universal leanings over time. It underscores our identity as Americans, it illuminates the American experience, and helps us understand who we are. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Veterans Museum today, and I know the word is quick and brief, so I'll endeavor to meet those requirements. We are located in Madison. However, it is not a Madison museum. It is a state museum. Our collection is made up of stories from all over the state. Some of our richest and most compelling stories are from Madison, or from Milwaukee, rather. I think of George Banda and some of the other guys you probably know. Well, where do we begin? How do we start? Well, Wisconsin Civil War veterans, in the years after the Civil War, as they aged, as one does when one ages, they begin to look back. And they wanted a place to house their relics, their artifacts, their experiences. So they petitioned the state for their own museum. And the Grand Army of the Republic Memorial Hall was established by legislative act to honor all Civil War veterans. And here's the good thing about that. They were smart enough to know that they wanted to establish a museum, a veterans museum, for all future veterans as well. So that was done in 1901. Well, 1945, end of the war, end of World War II, the Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs assumed control of the GAR Memorial Hall because the Civil War veterans, of course, were passing from the scene, largely almost gone by that period. In 1989, we moved from the Capitol building. Some of you may remember the old GAR Memorial Hall. We had 2 floors there. We moved to our current location at 30 West Mifflin, right across the street from the State Historical Museum. We're one of the few museums in the state that are accredited by the American Alliance of Museums. That's sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval for the museum profession. And we also have an affiliation with the Smithsonian Institution. Some sort of boilerplate things about the museum. We average over 90,000 in attendance annually, although this year we're going to shatter that. We'll be well above 100,000, largely because we have a traveling exhibit program that has made its rounds around the state and has drawn quite a number of people. About 11,000 square feet of object storage. The state, in its wisdom, has seen fit to build us a new storage facility, which will open in 2018. We'll be sharing that with the Historical Society. It's a purpose-built building. Price tag was $47 million, and it will get us out of our basement, which is not the best place for storage. We have 26,000 objects in our collection. They range from everything from personal souvenirs to weapons to aircraft. Each one has its own story. We have 2,000 oral histories in our collection. We have a very active oral history program. Our oral historian, Ellen Brooks, extremely active. We have, believe it or not, we have oral history recordings that contain information from Spanish-American War veterans. We go back as far as the Spanish-American War. Those interviews were conducted in the 1960s. About 20,000 students come through a year. Generally, they'll go to the Capitol and try to hit both of our museums, State Historical Museum and us. So what are these stories about? Well, on your tables, we've distributed some material, some literature from the museum, and each of those contains a number of stories about individuals. And really, that's what we do at the museum. We continue to tell those stories about veterans. And what those stories do, particularly for younger people, is really make it a personal experience. What you're looking at here is what they would have called back then an army hat, during the Civil War. This was worn by Philander Wright with the 2nd Wisconsin Infantry Regiment. Now he was wearing this, picture this, he was wearing this the day that the Iron Brigade, the 2nd Wisconsin and other portions of that brigade came through McPherson's Woods and engaged Archer's Confederate Brigade. That's on the first day at Gettysburg. He was in the color guard. And I might add that we have one of his direct descendants in the audience today, Eileen Newcomer. Well, they charged through the woods. Now picture this, he's with his color guard, so he's got he's carrying the national flag, the United States flag, and then there's the regimental flag, and then there's 2 color guard members. He writes after the battle that at one point he looked around and everyone was gone. They had been shot, either wounded or killed. He himself is struck 4 times by Confederate bullets, but he continues on, goes as far as he can, and then he's taken to the rear. This is the hat he wore that day. We also have in the collection the flag that he was carrying that day. Extremely rare artifact, wonderful story. He was a very, very interesting man, had a very colorful post-war career, and I'll tell you about that sometime if you'd like to know. I'll tell you anyway. He ran away with his brother's wife, but leaving that aside, I admire him immensely. This is a story that I find particularly moving, and when I started my career in the museum field, one of the first things I did, I went with a fellow curator from the Veterans Museum. We went up to a little town of Kiel in Wisconsin to meet with a gentleman named, last name Diefenthaler, and he was a farmer. And this is a great example of an object that in and of itself doesn't have much meaning. It's a cheap watch from the 1940s. But the story behind it is profound. And I'll never forget the day we talked to him about this, and we stood outside his barn, and he was telling us about his experiences in World War II. And he had a twin brother, and they were in the 106th Division. I don't know if you know much about that, but they were sent over after the invasion into the Battle of the Bulge. They were pretty green, not battle-tested, and a large portion of them were captured, sent to prisoner of war camp. And he was, when he was first captured, they had lined up, and the Germans were going down the line and confiscating things of value, watches, rings, anything they could take. And he saw this happening. So before the German soldier got to him, he took his watch off, he put it on the ground, and he crushed it. And then he put it back in his pocket, and of course, it was valueless at that point, but he held on to that. Now, he and his brother were both captured, his twin brother, sent to a prisoner of war camp. And he told us one morning when he had been called out for a work party, he was lined up, and I guess they were calling names or they were going down the line. And the German, now he spoke German as well, and the German soldier came to him and said, looked at him and said, "This can't be. I buried you this morning." So that's how he found out his brother had died in prisoner of war camp. And I tell you that story because these objects all have meaning, and they have, in many cases, have a profound meaning and a meaning that teaches lessons, and I think this is one of them. So we have about 12,000 square feet of exhibit space. We need about 30, really, to tell the story. But this serves us well for the time being. And this was, as an aside, this was designed by Jim Kelly and his group from Milwaukee Public Museum, so it has a very, very rich look and a heavy emphasis on dioramas. So I'm sure you're familiar with MPM, but if you see our museum for the first time, you'll get a sense that there's a connection there. The biplane that you're looking at on the left is a replica of Rodney Williams' Sopwith Camel. Fascinating story there as well. He was shot through the hip. Bullets pierced the gas tank of his Sopwith Camel. He reached back, plugged the hole in the gas tank, and landed the aircraft at a French airdrome in World War I and promptly passed out. Oop, I'm going to back that up a little bit. This is our next exhibit that opens up on May 27. And this is the art of persuasion, mobilizing the masses in World War I. The basis of this exhibit are World War I posters, but the message is, what does it take for a nation to mobilize, a government rather, to mobilize a nation, particularly for a war that at that point was not seen as our fight, particularly in Wisconsin with a large number of German descendants and German immigrants. So this will tell you a little bit about how the government was able to get the United States into the war largely through the efforts of the Committee on Public Information. And we're using World War I posters. So if you like art, there's that angle. And then there, of course, is the whole idea of what does it take to mobilize a nation. We do a number of programs through the year. I'm going to highlight a few of them. This is our Talking Spirits Tour, which is at Forest Hill in Madison. About 2,000 students come through. We have costumed, you're probably familiar with the idea, we have costumed actors portraying prominent or not so prominent Wisconsin personalities who were buried in that cemetery. It has a heavy Civil War emphasis. Oh, a little too quick with the trigger. Our outreach program, I alluded to a little bit earlier, Marching Across the State, that's our traveling exhibit program. And I believe the military mascots, Fur, Feathers, and Fidelity, I believe that was shown here at your public library, if I'm not mistaken. But we have two others. We have Working Warriors, which talks a little bit about what you do in the military when you're not engaged in combat, which is, for most of us, all we did. And then we have two fine art exhibits that are available as well. I want to leave time for Q&A here, so I'm going to move along quickly. We do have a foundation, a private 501c3 that supports the museum. So in addition to state funds, we're largely funded through our Veterans Trust Fund at the Department of Veterans Affairs. We do have an active foundation as well. We publish the Bugle on a quarterly basis. Tells you news about the museum. What is the future? Well, we're opening the new World War I exhibit next week. We'll follow that up next year because, of course, we're going into the centennial observance of the Great War. And that will probably feature personalities, Wisconsin personalities from World War I, maybe a heavy emphasis on the 32nd Division, of course, because World War I is the origin of the 32nd Division. Other elements of the future include, I told you a little bit about our storage facility, which we're very, very excited about, designed by Smith Group out of Washington, D.C. And for the past 6 years, we've been working on a new museum. And we've developed a visitor experience plan. And that new museum, as it's currently envisioned, would be a joint venture with the state historical societies that would house both of our museums at one site. And of course, as with those types of projects, money is the issue. And I told you a little bit about that already, so I won't go over that, but the State Archive Preservation Facility, it is a welcome addition. We have pretty good storage right now, but we are in the basement of a building that was built in 1962. And of course, we have all the typical social media outlets for you. So I think that concludes my report, and I'm happy to take questions at this point. Yes, sir. Thank you. Okay, the question was related to our exhibits and the sort of audio-visual elements that we have in the exhibits. We do rely on sort of an experiential element. So when you come into particularly all the galleries, you come into the Civil War gallery, you'll hear Civil War music. You'll also, as you walk by the cornfield, the Antietam cornfield, you'll hear a series of musket volleys. In the World War II section, you hear Battle of the Bulge, you hear the tanks. That's very perceptive of him to be able to tell the difference. And then, of course, Vietnam, you hear, what would you hear? You'll hear music, and you hear the sound of a Huey, right? Incidentally, the Huey that we have on exhibit actually flew in Vietnam with the 174th Assault Helicopter Company. We had a number of their men come and visit for a small reunion, and I can remember one fellow said, "I flew that helicopter," and he was with his spouse, and I said, "You'd like to get up in there, wouldn't you? We have it suspended," and he said, "Yeah," and his wife said, "You're not going up there." So much for that. Yes, sir. Very good. The question was, are most of our artifacts donated, or do we have an acquisitions strategy, and how does that work? Probably about 98% of our objects are donated. We do have what I consider a fairly active acquisition policy, and we do make purchases on a regular basis, but most of the material comes in voluntarily, and particularly right now with the World War II veterans sadly passing from the scene so quickly, we're seeing a lot of World War II material. But we see material from almost every period come in on an annual basis. Thank you. Yes, sir. I left that out. We do. We have, in our collection, we have 5 medals of honor, 2 of which are from Korea, and the remaining are World War II. I'm sorry, 3 are Korea, and the remaining are World War II. We have 4 of those on exhibit, and that's a relatively new exhibit that we opened probably about a year and a half ago. All of those are fascinating stories. All those were posthumous awards, with the exception of one. And I'll share with you real quickly. I know we're running out of time here, but I'll share with you real quickly a story about one of them. Kenneth Grenard, who was from around Fort Atkinson, I believe, just like any other Wisconsin farm boy, joined the 32nd Division before the war as a guard, sent to Australia, and then subsequently to New Guinea. They were supposed to be sent to Europe, but they sent him to Australia at the last minute. In any case, he comes under fire. He does some very heroic action at Buna, saving some fellow soldiers, and in the process he's killed in action. Now the custom is that the War Department sends a letter to the parents, and they say, we'd like you to come to Washington, D.C. to receive the Medal of Honor. And his parents wrote back to the War Department, and they said, there's a little sticker in the window of our car, and it says, is this trip necessary? So they wrote a letter back, and they said, we'd prefer that you take the money that you would spend on our trip and spend it on the boys in the field. And they read that letter at a joint session of Congress. We have that letter in our collection. So you can imagine, and the other medals have similar stories associated with them. But yeah, we're very honored to have those in our collection. Yes, ma'am. You talking about this facility? I don't know. We do actually. If you look as you come in the entrance, you look to your left and you see those figures, those bronze figures off to your left. Those are actually on loan from us, but. I've talked to Mr. Drent about some exhibits. We'll probably open that discussion up again. I would not be opposed to other conflicts being represented here, but I don't run the place. So, thank you for that question, though. It's a good question. Yes, ma'am. Well, the plan was for a downtown location in Madison, and that's still on the table. Actually, we just finished writing an article for the Blue Book, and we talk about Missionary Ridge and the whole on Wisconsin thing with MacArthur. We don't have any of their personal effects. We don't have any of their artifacts, so it's difficult for us to talk too much about them. I think we did have a label on the older MacArthur at one point, but there's an old rule in museums: if you don't have the stuff, don't talk about it. Well, thank you very much. It's been wonderful.
An MCM production.